Welcome back to this special edition of Emirates 24/7. We're coming to you direct from the World Economic Forum's Summit on the Global Agenda, being held right here in Dubai. Now, this week there's been a lot of conversation when it comes to the energy market. As many of you know, we've seen huge fluctuations in oil prices, and there's concerns we could see oil prices drop potentially to around $90 a barrel as the US approaches the much-feared fiscal cliff of higher taxes and lower spending. But with growing populations, particularly in the Middle East, energy use is soaring. So is this putting pressure on our supplies? Well, joining us to answer that and much more is the CEO of Crescent Petroleum, Majid Jafar. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Katie. Good to be here.
Great to have you here. Now, of course, there's so much talk about energy at the moment this week here at the forum. There's a lot of concern about how we can have stable energy prices in the year ahead, really try and drum up some economic growth and stability. How do you think we can actually see that happen?
Well, you raise a good point that stability is actually more important for both producers and consumers than the absolute level of the pricing. And we're now talking about a collapse to $90. I mean, I remember even in my career in the sector when oil was $9 a barrel, and now that could be a daily fluctuation. So it is important for both producing and consuming countries to have that level of stability. Having said that, despite the global economic downturn, oil prices are still high, energy prices still high, and this region obviously has benefited from that. And it doesn't seem to have negatively impacted economic recoveries in the big oil-consuming countries.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right, the fluctuations. I know only the beginning of this year, we were talking on this show about oil prices potentially reaching $150 a barrel around summer, certainly different times now. So I guess what are the biggest challenges facing the energy sector today? How do you think that will be addressed at Davos? I know one of the big passions for you is youth unemployment, and it's something you're trying to address in the energy sector at the forum.
Well, I think worldwide we can divide it into demand side and supply side. And supply, the transition to renewables and new forms of energy and technology is well publicized, climate change being a big driver. But there really needs to be economic logic behind it as well. The green economy needs to be an economy as well as just green. And that's being realized now, particularly with financial and economic pressures on governments in Europe and so on. And the irony is that the US, despite not having targets, Kyoto targets and so on, is actually to the lowest emission levels in 20 years, thanks to gas, thanks to the shale gas revolution. Looking back to the region, and I'm on the Global Agenda Council for Youth Unemployment, and it is a universal issue now across the world. The causes are sometimes different in each region, but it's being felt everywhere in the world, even where young populations or aging populations. Here in the region, our challenge is a big part of our GDP comes from energy, and yet the energy sector doesn't actually employ that many people. And as technology improves in it, it employs less and less. So the challenge that regional governments are having is how to use these resources, not just the financial, but the energy supply itself sometimes, and create internal investment and job creation. And this is where we as regional companies feel we can play a role. Sometimes the large international companies are more focused on export, whereas we try and focus on domestic needs first and foremost.
Absolutely, you've got to be able to invest back into the region where you're taking those fossil fuels from. Actually, there's some interesting comments saying that we need clear and good energy policies when it comes to the Middle East. What would you like to see put in place?
Well, we have some incongruous or illogical situations. So some countries in the region are being forced to burn crude oil for power, including Saudi and Kuwait, which is $110 a barrel, while gas is being supplied to industry at $4 a barrel. And this is a destruction of value. There's recognition for policy reform on the pricing side. So diversity of supply is important, recognizing that although the Middle East has 60% of the world's oil and 40% of the world's gas, it's also the fastest growing market for energy. Our own demand in the region for energy has gone up 500% in the last 30 years. And this is impacting our ability to export and our revenues from these energy resources. So we need to use them smartly. So the supply side needs to be matched with the demand side. And demand management, green building codes, as we're seeing here in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, reform of the pricing structure, so at least there are segmented pricing, so that higher consumers have to pay more, because only when you impact the price do you really impact the demand, and education from school level and up on the need for energy efficiency and care for consumption. On the supply side, gas is a fastest growing energy resource, particularly for power, for industry in our region, driven by the growth in populations and in the economy that we have here. And the gas sector has just started to being developed now in the region and needs the right incentives in terms of the upstream incentives, the contractual incentives, but even down to the downstream. If the end user price for electricity and industry is too low, you don't need to say subsidized, but below market pricing, you won't have the necessary investment in this crucial resource.
Absolutely. It's something we've talked about for a long time, the difference between the supply and the demand, and hopefully it does get addressed soon. Now, finally, because we're almost out of time, I want to ask you, obviously we're facing a post-Arab Spring world. You've seen a lot of new opportunities in the region. Are you finding that the new governments that have now come to power are more interested in working with Arab or Western companies?
Well, I think all of them recognize the need for investment. And in the oil and gas sector, it's going to be key for those that have the resources, Egypt, Libya. And we've found a pro-investment climate. Welcome to the GCC companies in particular. We've had strong support from the UAE government and engagement by UAE embassies with us, with these host governments. We feel as regional companies, although there are risks, we're better placed to perhaps analyze and assess and manage those risks. So we expect that we hopefully have more opportunities in these countries, inshallah.
Let's hope so. I know you've got a lot of investment in Kurdistan at the moment. Certainly very exciting, potentially unstable region, but some big opportunities. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Katie. Good to be here.